Dad, you can't have an opinion anymore. I didn't answer. I just took out my savings and left them with debts. I never imagined that a piece of paper could hurt more than a bullet. The bank clerk looked at me in silence before saying it. Mr. Robert, according to the record, you are no longer the owner of the Oak Ridge Ranch. He showed me the document. There was my signature, my name, and beneath them, those of John Harrison and Mary Rogers, my daughter and my son-in-law. The ranch that I built with 40 years of work, valued at $6 million, had been transferred to their names. The notary swore that I was present signing. But while they were stealing my life, I was at the hospital watching over my wife, Claire. I left the bank with my vision blurred, thinking of only one thing. I wouldn't scream, I wouldn't cry, I would just wait. And when the time came, they would know what the silence of a humiliated man means. But to understand how I reached that moment, we have to go back to the day they told me to be quiet. Before I continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are listening from. My name is Robert Mendez, and I am 72 years old. Sunday lunch should have been what it always was. Warm cornbread on the wooden table, the smell of the barbecue, pulled pork that Mary prepared the way her mother taught her, and the voices of the family filling the house that I built brick by brick. But that Sunday, something changed forever. That Sunday, I learned that in my own house, I no longer had a voice. John Harrison. My son-in-law was sitting at the head of the table in my place, with that confidence that only men who believe the world owes them something have. He spoke of business, of contracts, of plans to expand the ranch's production. I listened in silence, chewing slowly, feeling how every mouthful became harder to swallow. "We need to modernize everything," John said, gesticulating with his fork. "The old methods don't work anymore, Dad. This ranch could yield 3 times as much if we invested in technology." I put my glass of water on the table harder than I intended. The sound made everyone look up. "John," I said, and my voice came out more tired than I expected. "This ranch has borne fruit for 40 years. I know every patch of land, every season. We don't need to invent what already works." Silence fell like a stone in a dry well. John put his silverware aside, wiped his mouth with his napkin, and looked at me with that expression I had learned to recognize. Pity mixed with impatience, as if he were dealing with a stubborn child. "Dad," Mary intervened, my daughter, my only daughter, gently touching my arm. "John only wants what's best for everyone." "What's best for everyone," I repeated, and the words tasted bitter. "This ranch is Dad. You can't have an opinion anymore." John's words cut the air like a machete. I remained motionless with my mouth ajar, feeling the heat rise up my neck. Around the table, no one moved. My 8-year-old grandson, Thomas, stared at his plate as if he wanted to disappear into it. Mary lowered her gaze, and John held my stare with a coldness I had never seen. "With all due respect, Dad," he continued, and there was something in that respect that sounded like mockery. "Things have changed. We need to make quick decisions. And well, at your age, it's better for you to rest. We'll take care of it." The laugh came after. Brief, dry, but sufficient. John let out a little chuckle as he returned to his plate, as if he had made an inconsequential comment about the weather. And Mary? My God. Mary also smiled. A small, almost apologetic smile, but one that pierced my chest like barbed wire. I didn't say anything else during the rest of the lunch. I mechanically ate. I drank water. I nodded when someone passed me something, but inside, something broke. Or maybe it didn't break, but hardened like metal tempered in fire. After eating, while they settled in the living room to watch television, I went out to the yard. The April sun beat down hard on the wooden fences, on the corrals where the cattle I bought with my first savings were grazing. Every post of that fence had my sweat on it. Every stone on the path held the echo of my worn-out boots. "You can't have an opinion anymore," I murmured to myself, tasting dry earth in my mouth. Mary appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on her apron. "Dad, don't take it the wrong way. John is just stressed with business." "And you, daughter?" I asked without turning to look at her. "Do you also think I can't have an opinion anymore?" She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded distant, as if speaking from across a river. "Dad, we just want you to rest. You deserve it." Rest. What a nice word for step aside. That night, lying in the bed I shared with Claire for 45 years, I looked at the ceiling and thought about her absence. It had been only 6 months since I lost her. 6 months since she closed her eyes in the hospital while I held her hand, and now, the house we built together felt like enemy territory. John slept in the guest room, but not as a guest, as the owner. Mary avoided my eyes when we talked about money or decisions. And I, Robert Mendez, 72 years old, 4 decades of work, had become an obstacle in my own life. But in that dark silence of the early morning, while the wind moved the curtains and brought the smell of the fields, I made a decision. I wouldn't argue again. I wouldn't raise my voice again. I wouldn't give explanations or ask for respect. Instead, I would do something they would never expect from an old man who can't have an opinion anymore. I would watch them. I would wait. And when the moment came, at that instant, without them perceiving it, I began to plan my exit. And theirs too. The Oak Ridge Ranch was born from my empty hands and the blind faith of a woman named Claire. The days following that Sunday humiliation passed in a heavy silence. But my mind constantly traveled to the past, to 1978, when these lands were nothing more than dry brush and stones. Claire was 25 years old, and I was 28, recently married with no more capital than $400 saved and a dream that everyone thought was crazy. "Robert," Claire had told me that afternoon, as we looked at the arid land under the relentless sun, "if we dig together, it will flourish." And we dug. For 3 years we dug. We put up the first fence with mesquite posts that I cut myself at dawn. We planted corn in earth that had to be watered with buckets because we didn't have an irrigation system. Claire cooked on a wood stove while I worked 18 hours a day. When Mary was born, we cradled her among sacks of seeds and tools. 40 years later, Oak Ridge was a prosperous ranch of 120 acres. Quality cattle, alfalfa that we sold to neighboring ranches, 2 tractors, a drip irrigation system that I installed with loans that I paid religiously for 10 years. Everything valued, according to the last appraisal, at $6 million. And now, sitting in the yard that I built with my own hands, I watched John Harrison give orders to the ranch hands as if he were born the owner of all this. "Mr. Robert," called Ethan, the foreman who had worked with me for 22 years. "I'm fine, Ethan," I lied, without taking my eyes off John. My son-in-law had come into our lives 5 years ago. Agronomy engineer, he said. Businessman. Mary fell in love with his confidence, his elegant words, his promises of modernization. I received him with open arms. A prepared son-in-law, I thought. He would be a blessing for the ranch. When he asked me to invest in his alfalfa export project, I didn't hesitate. $400,000 of my savings went into his company. "It's for everyone, Dad," he had told me with that smile that I now recognized as false. "We are going to triple the profits." The profits never came. But John did. more and more often, with more and more opinions, with more and more control. First, they were suggestions. We should change the cattle feed supplier. Then, decisions. I already hired a new veterinarian. Finally, orders. The ranch hands will work on Sunday. We need to increase production. Mary, my daughter, had become his echo. She repeated his words, defended his decisions. And when I tried to voice an opinion, she looked away, as if my 40 years of experience were dust that the wind should carry away. One afternoon, 2 weeks after the lunch where they silenced me, I found John in my office. He was reviewing the cattle sale contracts with papers scattered on the desk that Claire gave me for our 20th anniversary. "John, what are you doing with those documents?" "Reviewing the contracts, Dad," he replied without looking up. "We have to optimize. We are losing money with intermediaries." "Those intermediaries are trustworthy people. 30 years working with them." "Exactly. 30 years. It's time to change." I walked closer to the desk. I smelled the old coffee in his cup, mixed with the scent of his expensive cologne. I reached out my hand to take one of the contracts, but John gently moved it aside. "Relax, Mr. Robert. I'll take care of it. You'd better rest." That word again. Rest, as if resting was my only purpose. "John, this ranch belongs to the family," I interrupted. And this time, he did look at me. "And the family needs it to be profitable. With all due respect, your methods are old-fashioned." I left the office with my hands shaking, not from fear, but from contained rage. Perhaps because that night, Mary prepared macaroni and cheese, my favorite dish. She served it in silence, avoiding my eyes, as she had done for weeks. John ate with appetite, talking about new projects, investments, contacts in the city. "Dad," Mary finally said, "John and I were thinking, maybe you should travel a little, rest, see your cousins in Texas." Travel. The words came out harsh. "Now that Mom is no longer here and you're working so hard, you deserve to enjoy yourself." Enjoy myself. Another elegant word for go away. "I'm fine here," I replied. John put down his spoon and wiped his mouth with studied calm. "Dad, it's not a suggestion. We need space to work without interference." Interference. I, Robert Mendez, who raised this ranch from nothing, was an interference. I didn't answer. I finished my macaroni and cheese in silence, feeling how every spoonful weighed in my stomach. After dinner, while they were washing the dishes, I went to my room and took out the folder with the ranch deeds from a drawer. I reviewed them one by one in the light of the lamp. Everything was in order. The ranch was in my name, the legal documents. But something in my gut told me to check deeper. The next day, under the pretext of going to the doctor, I went to the bank. The same institution where I had applied for my first loans 40 years ago. I asked to speak with the credit manager. "Mr. Robert, how can I help you?" "I want to review the status of my properties, confirm that everything is in order." The manager typed on his computer. He frowned. He typed again. "Please allow me a moment." That moment turned into 10 minutes, then 20. When he returned, he was carrying a folder and an expression I didn't like. It was in that same month that I perceived something strange in the deeds, and the fear began to smell like wet earth before the rain. The word fraud sounds different when it's your own life that has been stolen. The bank manager returned with 3 other employees. They led me to a private office where the air conditioning hummed like a swarm of angry bees. On the desk, they unfolded documents that bore my name, my signature, my history turned into betrayal. "Mr. Robert," he began, and his voice had that careful tone that doctors use before delivering bad news. "According to our records, you carried out a property transfer 3 months ago." The Oak Ridge Ranch was transferred to the names of John Harrison and Mary Rogers. The world stopped. "That's impossible," I said, and my voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "I never signed anything." They showed me the document, official letterhead, notarial seals, and there on the bottom line, a signature that was supposedly mine. It looked similar. It had my characteristics. But I knew my own handwriting as I knew the lines on my hands. And that signature had something strange. A different slant on the R, a firmer stroke on the final Z. "When does it say this was signed?" I asked, as the cold of the air conditioning chilled my bones. "March 15th, he replied. "According to the public notary, you were present along with your daughter and son-in-law." I closed my eyes. March 15th. That date was etched in my memory. On March 15th, I was at the New York General Hospital, sitting next to Claire's bed while the doctors tried to stabilize her after her third heart attack. Claire had died 2 days later, on March 17th, with my hand holding hers. "That day," I said, opening my eyes and staring at the manager. "That day, I was at the hospital. My wife was dying." The silence in the office became dense, heavy. The employees exchanged uncomfortable glances. "I have the hospital papers," and my voice began to tremble, not from weakness, but from fury. "I have records, witnesses, doctors who can confirm that I did not leave that hospital for 3 days. The manager cleared his throat. "Mr. Robert, I understand your situation, but legally, this document is valid. It is registered with witnesses. If there were irregularities, you will have to proceed legally." "Irregularities?" I repeated, and the word tasted like ash. "That's what they call theft now?" I asked for copies of everything. Every paper, every falsified signature, every seal that legitimized the dispossession. I left the bank with a folder under my arm and the world wobbling under my feet. I drove through the streets of the town with no fixed destination. I passed in front of Mr. Henry's house, where we used to play dominoes on Fridays. I passed in front of the church where Claire and I got married. I passed in front of the school where Mary took her first steps in the Mother's Day festival. And I thought about when I lost my daughter. When I arrived at the ranch, it was mid-afternoon. The sun was beating vertically on the corrals. John was next to the barn, talking on the phone, laughing. Mary was hanging clothes on the line with that flowered apron that had been her mother's. But when she saw me arrive, she quickly looked away. That elusive gaze had something of shame, something of guilt. I entered the house without making a sound. I went straight to my room and took out a metal box that I kept under the bed. Inside were the original ranch documents. The deeds from 1978, when I bought the first 20 acres. The expansions from 1985, and 1992. The loan payments. The updated deeds, in my name, Robert Mendez. Everything in order, everything legal, everything stolen. That night at dinner, I observed them as if seeing them for the first time. John ate with appetite, talking about a new contract to sell alfalfa. Mary nodded, smiled, served more water. But her hands trembled slightly as she filled my glass. My grandson Thomas was drawing in a notebook, oblivious to the poison floating in the air. "How was your day, Dad?" Mary asked, and there was something forced in her cheerfulness. "Quiet," I replied. I went to the bank. Personal matters. I saw how John looked up for just a second. I saw how his eyes met Mary's. I saw the silent message that passed between them, quick as lightning. They knew. They knew that I knew. "Everything in order?" John asked, and his voice sounded casual, but his knuckles were white on the fork. "Everything in order," I lied. And for the first time in my life, lying tasted good. After dinner, I went out to the yard. The stars shone over the ranch that was no longer mine. I heard the lowing of the cattle that I bought with my savings. I felt the breeze that brought the smell of the alfalfa that I sowed with my hands. Every fence I saw in the gloom reminded me of a battle won. Every tree required a year of effort, every stone on the path a drop of sweat. And they had taken it all while I watched over my dying wife. Ethan, the foreman, approached with the slow gait of a man who has worked the land all his life. "Mr. Robert?" "I'm fine, Ethan," I said, and my voice sounded strangely calm. "Have you noticed anything strange lately?" "In the papers, in the decisions." The old foreman looked towards the house where the living room lights shone warmly. "Mr. Robert, it's not my place to comment, but I have noticed things. Mr. John has been moving cattle without consulting you. He has changed contracts." "Ethan, has he been talking about mortgaging the ranch?" The words fell on me like stones. I didn't say anything else. I wished Ethan good night and returned to my room. I sat on the bed I shared with Claire for 45 years. I stroked her photograph on the nightstand. "Forgive me, Claire," I whispered. "Forgive me for not protecting what we built." But while the tears rolled down my wrinkled cheeks, something else grew in my chest. It wasn't just pain. It wasn't just betrayal. It was determination. They had taken away my voice. They had taken away my respect. They had taken away my ranch. But what they didn't know, what they never imagined, is that a 72-year-old man who built an empire from nothing also knows how to destroy one. They were still laughing that night, not imagining that the quiet old man had already begun to dig their financial graves. What they didn't know is that the silence of a betrayed man is worth more than any inheritance. The first change arrived on a Tuesday morning. The office locks were new. I tried to open the door with my key, as I had done for 40 years. The key turned in the void. I tried again, thinking that maybe the mechanism had jammed with dust. Nothing. The lock had been changed. "Looking for something, Dad?" John appeared behind me with 2 steaming cups of coffee. He offered me one with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The door won't open," I said, pointing out the obvious. "Oh, yes, we changed the locks yesterday for security, you know. With so many employees coming and going. Here, take your coffee." He didn't offer me a new key. He simply stood there, waiting for me to leave. "I need to review the—" "I've already taken care of that," he interrupted. "Everything under control. Better enjoy your coffee on the patio. It's a beautiful morning." I walked away with the cup in my hand, feeling the heat burn my fingers. From the patio, I watched John enter my office. Through the window, I saw him sit in my chair, putting his feet up on my desk. The following days were a succession of small dispossession. Ethan came to ask me about planting alfalfa in the north lot, as he had done every season for 22 years. Before I could answer, John appeared. "Ethan, from now on, all decisions go through me. Mr. Robert is retired." "Retired?" Ethan looked at me, confused. "Retired," John confirmed firmly. "It's best for everyone." Ethan left without waiting for my response, because there was no response left to wait for. A week later, I found all the ranch hands gathered next to the barn. John was at the front with a tablet in his hand, talking about new schedules, new work quotas. "Starting tomorrow, you will also work on Sundays. We need to double production." "But, Mr. John," Ethan protested, "Sundays have always been for rest. Mr. Robert no longer makes decisions here." The words floated in the hot May air. The ranch hands looked at me, expecting me to say something, to defend tradition, to defend them. I opened my mouth and closed it again. What was the use? The ranch was no longer mine. My voice no longer mattered. I was a ghost on my own land. That night, Mary came to my room. She knocked softly before entering, as if I were a stranger who needed permission. "Dad, I need to talk to you." "Tell me." She sat on the edge of the bed, wringing her hands in her lap. She had dark circles under her eyes, as if she wasn't sleeping well. Part of me wanted to comfort her. The other part only felt emptiness. "Dad, I know all of this is difficult for you, but it's just to organize ourselves better. John has experience in administration. You have worked for so long. You deserve to rest." That word again. Rest, as if I were an old horse that needed to be taken to the pasture to die in peace. "And the Locke's daughter? Is that also organization?" She looked away. "It's for security. There are important papers. Contracts. Papers that I signed. Contracts that I negotiated." "Dad, please don't make this harder," she pleaded. "Harder for who, Mary?" She stood up, tears shining in her eyes. But they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of frustration, from a daughter who wanted her father to simply obey and disappear. "For everyone," she replied. "For everyone, Dad." She left the room, closing the door softly. The sound of the latch was like a tombstone falling onto a grave. The days turned into weeks, and I became a guest in the house I built brick by brick. I no longer sat at the head of the table. That place belonged to John. I sat to the side where occasional visitors used to sit. I ate, I was silent while they talked about plans, investments, futures that didn't include me. In the mornings, I walked the ranch like a ghost. The ranch hands greeted me with respect, but they no longer consulted me. Decisions came from John. Orders came from John. The ranch responded to John. One afternoon, I found my grandson Thomas crying behind the barn. "What happened, son?" Dad yelled at me. I asked him if you could teach me to ride like you promised, and he got angry. He said, "You don't call the shots here anymore." I hugged the boy, feeling his small body tremble against my chest. And at that moment, something inside me crystallized. It wasn't rage. It wasn't pain. It was absolute clarity. They could take my office. They could take my chair at the table. They could take the employees' respect. They could even take the ranch with falsified papers. But there was one thing they couldn't take: time. And I had patience. They had taught me that revenge is not shouted. It is cooked slowly, like the barbecue pulled pork that Claire prepared for hours, until every ingredient revealed its true flavor. That night, I sat on the porch of the house, looking at the stars. I heard the laughter of John and Mary inside, celebrating some new achievement. I heard the clinking of wine glasses that they probably bought with my money, and I smiled. It was a small, bitter smile, but a smile nonetheless, because while they were celebrating their victory, I was already drawing up my strategy. While they slept peacefully, thinking they had won, I counted every move I would make to recover what was mine. Not with shouts, not with violence, not with tears, with silence, with patience, with the wisdom of a man who built a ranch from nothing, and who therefore knew exactly how to dismantle everything. A quiet old man is dangerous, because no one knows what he thinks. No one knows what he's planning. No one imagines what he is capable of until it is too late. And for John and Mary, it was almost too late. Mr. Leo Foster was 84 years old and had a memory sharper than any computer. I found him in his downtown office, a place that smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. The walls were lined with civil codes, jurisprudence, and photographs of cases won during 60 years of practice. Mr. Leo had been my father's lawyer, then mine, and he knew every square foot of land in the region. "Robert Mendez," he said when I entered, rising with difficulty from his leather chair. "I haven't seen you in months. My condolences for Claire. She was a great woman." "Thank you, Leo. Sit down. By the look on your face, you're here for more than a courtesy visit." I handed him the folder with all the documents, the falsified deeds, the bank records, the hospital papers that proved I was in New York on the day of the supposed signing. Mr. Leo put on his reading glasses and reviewed each page with the meticulousness of a goldsmith examining gold. The silence lasted for 20 minutes. Only the ticking of the antique clock on the wall and the rustle of the pages could be heard. Finally, he took off his glasses and looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "Robert, this is notarial fraud, signature forgery, dispossession. These are serious crimes." "I know. Do you want to proceed legally?" "Because I can." "No," I interrupted him. "Not yet." Mr. Leo raised an eyebrow. "Then I want to know if there is a way to get my ranch back without them realizing it. Legally. I want them to think they won until it's too late." A slow smile appeared on the wrinkled face of the old lawyer. "Now I understand why your father always said you were the cleverest of his children." We spent the next 2 hours reviewing every detail. Mr. Leo explained the flaws in the transfer process, the impossible date, the lack of real witnesses, the notary who had most likely been bribed or deceived. "But there's something else," Mr. Leo said, gently tapping the desk with his pipe. "If they try to mortgage or sell the ranch, they will need additional documentation. And that's where we can act. We can block any transaction alleging inconsistencies in the deeds, without them knowing it was me. Without them knowing it was you, at least not immediately. How much time do you need?" "Give me 2 weeks. I will move the necessary papers. I will present the inconsistencies to the public registry. When they try to use those false deeds for any paperwork, they will hit a wall." I left Mr. Leo's office with something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. It wasn't the naive hope that everything would just work out. It was the cold, calculated hope of a man who knows exactly what to do to recover what was stolen from him. But first, I needed to protect what they still had access to: my money. The next day, with the excuse of going to the doctor, I visited the 3 bank branches where I had accounts. At the first, I withdrew $800,000. At the second, $940,000. At the third, $600,000. In total, $2,340,000 in cash. My life savings, 40 years of savings, Claire's pension, the ranch profits that still legally belong to me. "Mr. Robert," the manager of the last bank asked me, "Are you sure? That's a lot of cash." "Completely sure. I'm going to invest in a business," I lied. I was going to protect it from the hands that had already robbed me once. I opened a new account in a bank in the neighboring city, 2 hours away. An account that only I knew about. I deposited the full cash amount, $2,340,000, that John and Mary would never find. When I returned to the ranch that afternoon, I came back with empty hands but a lighter step. John was in the yard, supervising the loading of alfalfa. "How was the doctor, Dad?" Fine. Just routine checkups." "And what did he say?" "Everything in order." There was something in his tone, a feigned curiosity that hid something else. Suspicion, fear. "Everything in order for a man my age," I replied, stooping a little more than necessary. "Though he prescribed more medication, my blood pressure, and he told me to avoid stress." I saw John relax his shoulders as his smile became more genuine. For that very reason, Dad, let us take care of everything. You just rest. That night at dinner, I played my part perfectly. I trembled a little when pouring water. I dropped my fork once. I asked for things to be repeated because I didn't hear well. I complained about my back, my tiredness, my age. Mary looked at me with genuine pity. Dad, do you want us to call the doctor? No, daughter, I'm just tired. I'm very tired. And I was. But not the kind of tiredness they imagined. I was tired of pretending weakness when inside I was pure tempered steel. I was tired of listening to their plans when mine were already in motion. I was tired of seeing them celebrate a victory that was about to turn into their worst nightmare. That night, before sleeping, I took the deposit receipt for the $2,340,000 from my wallet. I put it away in the same place where Claire used to hide her jewelry, inside an old prayer book that no one else would look in. Mr. Leo called exactly a week later. Robert, it's done. I presented the inconsistencies. The public registry has frozen any transaction on the ranch until the legal situation is clarified. If they try to sell or mortgage, they won't be able to. And do they know yet? No. They won't know until they try to make a move. Perfect, Robert. Are you sure about this? Once they know, the war will be open. The war already started, Leo. They started it when they falsified my signature while I watched over my dying wife. I'm just finishing it. I hung up the phone and looked out the window. John was loading boxes into his truck. Mary was watering the garden plants. Everything so normal, everything so calm. They didn't know that the ground beneath their feet was already tightening, that the ranch they thought was theirs was trapped in a legal limbo, that the money they planned to use had already flown away. And best of all, they had no idea that the decrepit old man who shuffled his feet and forgot things was playing a game of chess that they didn't even know had begun. While they slept peacefully, I signed the document that would seal their fate. The trap closed on a Thursday morning when John returned from the bank with a face the color of ash. I was on the porch, rocking slowly in the chair that Claire gave me for my 50th birthday. I pretended to be asleep with my hat over my face and my hands crossed over my chest. But from under the brim, I watched everything. John got out of the truck, slamming the door, which startled the chickens. Mary ran out of the kitchen. What happened? Did you get the loan or not? John's voice trembled. I didn't get it. Something is wrong. Very wrong. What do you mean? The ranch? The deeds? The bank says there are inconsistencies in the documentation. They can't process any mortgage until the legal situation of the property is clarified. I felt my heart beat harder, but I kept my breathing slow, my body motionless. Just an old man sleeping in the sun. Inconsistencies? Mary's voice went up an octave. What? What kind of inconsistencies are there? They didn't tell me exactly. Just that the public registry has an alert on the property, that there are contradictory documents. There was a long silence. I could feel their eyes searching for each other. I could smell their fear mixed with the dry air of June. Do you think he started this, Mary? No, John cut in quickly. Look at him. He can barely walk straight. He has no idea how these legal things work. How wrong they were. But John, we need that money. The company, the debts. I know, Mary, I know. I waited until they entered the house before opening my eyes. The sun shone brightly on the lands they had stolen from me, on the fences that my hands raised, on the future they thought they had secured, and that was now crumbling like sand between their fingers. The following weeks were a descent into hell, and I had a front row seat. John started receiving calls, many calls. Suppliers demanding payments, partners claiming investments, the bank pressuring for a previous loan that I didn't know about. Every day, his face looked more haggard, grayer, more desperate. Mary stopped smiling. The dark circles under her eyes became permanent. The dishes on the table decreased in quantity and quality. There was no more wine at dinners, no more laughter. One night, I heard screams from their bedroom. "I told you it was risky." Mary's voice cut through the walls. "I told you to wait." "We needed to expand the business," John replied. "How was I supposed to know the old man?" "The old man, John?" A silence that weighed like lead. The next month, the bank men arrived. Not at the ranch, but at John's export company in town. I found out from Ethan, who heard it from a cousin who worked at the city hall. "Mr. Robert," Ethan told me in a low voice as we checked the fences of the west lot. "They say Mr. John owes $1,802,000. That they seized the offices. That the company went bankrupt." $1,800,000? I repeated, feigning surprise. "That's what they say, boss, and there's more. They say he invested badly. That he bet on a business that didn't work out. That now the creditors want their money." That afternoon when I returned home, I found John sitting on the porch steps. His head was in his hands. Next to him, a half-empty bottle of whiskey. I sat next to him without saying anything. The silence stretched out like a shadow. "I lost everything, Dad." His voice finally broke. "Everything. The company, the contracts, the savings. Everything." "The ranch?" I asked gently. "I can't touch it. There's some legal problem that I don't understand. The lawyer says it could take months to resolve. And I don't have months. The creditors are pressuring me. They want to seize everything I own, everything. The truck, furniture, even the company tools. And if I don't pay in 30 days... His voice broke. "They say they can go after Mary, too. After her things. After..." He didn't finish the sentence. He brought the bottle to his lips and drank deeply. "John," I said, and my voice sounded softer than he deserved. "What did you do with the $400,000 I lent you?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. "You lost them, didn't you? In that business that went bankrupt." "It was going to work out," he whispered. "It was going to multiply. We were all going to be fine. But it didn't work out, did it?" I stood up slowly, feigning the effort of age. I looked at the horizon where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky orange and purple. "Now, John," I said with absolute calm. "Now the land belongs to those who work it." I left him there with his bottle and his defeat. 3 days later, Mary knocked on my bedroom door. It was 11 o'clock at night. When I opened it, I found her with eyes swollen from crying. "Dad," her voice was a thin thread. "I need to talk to you." "Come in, daughter." She sat on the edge of the bed, in the same place where Claire used to sit when she needed to vent. For a moment, I saw the girl she was. The one who hugged me when she was scared. The one who asked me to carry her after falling off the swing. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "What are you sorry for, Mary?" "Everything. For silencing you. For pushing you aside. For allowing John..." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Dad, we are ruined. The creditors are going to take everything from us. I don't know what to do." I looked at her in silence. Part of me wanted to comfort her. The other part, the part that had been humiliated, dispossessed, and betrayed, only felt a cold emptiness. "And what do you expect me to do, daughter?" "I don't know. I just needed to tell you." I needed you to know that I regret it." She stood up to leave. But before opening the door, she turned to look at me one last time. "Dad, did you have something to do with the bank thing? With the ranch being blocked?" I looked her in the eyes of my only daughter, and I lied with the same ease with which they had falsified my signature. "Daughter, I can barely remember where I left my glasses. Do you think I'm capable of moving legal papers?" She nodded, wanting to believe. But before they left the next day with their last belongings in the truck that had not yet been seized, I left a manila envelope on the kitchen table. But what they did next surpassed any previous betrayal. The manila envelope remained on the table for 3 days before they returned. I looked at it every morning while drinking my coffee. I knew what it contained. I knew the weight of those papers. I knew that inside were the definitive proofs. Documents that prove the fraud irrefutably. Notarized testimonies. Sworn statements from the hospital doctors. That envelope was not meant to punish them. It was meant to remind them, when the time came, that I still had the last word. Ethan kept me informed of everything. John had sold the truck to pay part of the debt. Mary had pawned her jewelry, even the ring that Claire gave her for her wedding. They now lived in a rented house in the town, a small place near the highway where the noise of the trucks wouldn't let them sleep at night. "Mr. Robert," Ethan told me one afternoon, "did you know they falsified the deeds?" "I suspected it," I replied, without entirely lying. "And why didn't you do anything sooner?" "Because sometimes, Ethan, justice is not shouted. It is sown. And when it grows, it bears bitter fruits that the one who sowed it must harvest." The old foreman nodded slowly, as if understanding something deeper than my words. It was a Saturday afternoon when I heard the sound of a familiar engine on the driveway. But it wasn't John's truck. It was an old borrowed car, surely with a broken muffler and peeling paint. I stayed on the porch in my rocking chair, waiting. John got out first, and he was not the same man. The proud son-in-law who sat in my place, who gave orders and smiled smugly, had disappeared. This John had a hunched back, wrinkled clothes, a several-day-old beard that was not style but neglect. Mary got out next, holding Thomas by the hand. My grandson had grown in these months, but his eyes held a sadness that no child should know. Mary didn't dare to look at me directly either. They stood at the foot of the steps, like beggars waiting for permission to enter a place they once considered theirs. "Mr. Robert," John began, and his voice broke. We need to talk to you." "Speak," I said without getting up from my chair. John went up one step, then he stopped. Tears were already streaming down his face, without him making an effort to hide them. "I'm sorry. That's what I've come to say. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry for everything. For silencing you. For displacing you." He swallowed hard. "For the deeds." There was the confession, the words that had been trapped in the air for months. "The deeds?" I asked calmly, as if I didn't know what he was talking about. "I falsified your signature," John continued, falling to his knees. "It was my idea. I convinced Mary that it was for the best. I told her you were old, that we needed to secure the future. I lied. I manipulated. I stole. I'm a thief, Mr. Robert. A miserable thief." Mary remained several steps back, with Thomas's hand pressed against hers. She cried silently, without a sound, like Claire cried when she didn't want anyone to hear her. "And you, daughter?" I asked. "Did you also come to ask for forgiveness?" She took a step forward. Her voice was barely audible. "Dad, I knew. I didn't sign the papers. But I knew what John was going to do, and I didn't stop him. I betrayed you too. I betrayed your trust, your love, everything you did for me. Why? It was the only question that needed an answer. Because I was scared, Mary replied. Scared that this wasn't enough for us. Scared that John would leave if things didn't work out. Scared of being nothing without him. And now? I asked. Now that you have nothing, what are you? No one answered. I stood up slowly from the chair. I went into the house and returned with a folder I had stored in my room. The same folder that Mr. Leo had prepared with such meticulousness. Do you know what this is? I asked, showing them the documents. John shook his head, still on his knees. These are the original ranch deeds, the real ones, with all the inconsistencies of your false documents exposed, with proof that I was in the hospital when I supposedly signed the transfer, with the testimonies of the doctors, the nurses, even the cafeteria employee who sold me coffee those nights. I opened the folder and showed them the last document, a new deed dated just 2 weeks ago. The Oak Ridge Ranch has returned to its legitimate owner, Robert Mendez. Everything legal, everything documented, everything irreversible. The silence that followed was heavier than any word. Dad, Mary whispered. Since when? Since I found out what you did. Since the day I went to the bank and saw the falsified signature. From that moment on, I started moving every piece on the chessboard. John looked up, and in his eyes, I saw something that surprised me. It wasn't rage. It was relief. The relief of a man who can finally stop carrying the weight of his lie. Are you going to report us? He asked. The question hung in the hot air of July. I looked at my daughter, who was holding my grandson. I looked at John, destroyed on the wooden steps that my hands built. I looked at the ranch behind them, the lands that were still mine, that had always been mine. No, I finally replied. I'm not going to report you. Mary let out a gasp of relief. But I'm not going to help you either, I continued. You dug your own financial grave. You gambled my inheritance and you lost it. Now you will live with the consequences. That's fine, John said, standing up with difficulty. It's fair. It's more than we deserve. They prepared to leave. Mary approached as if to hug me, but she stopped halfway. She understood that she had lost that right too. Goodbye, Dad. Goodbye, daughter. I watched them walk away along the dirt road. The old car coughed black smoke before starting. Thomas waved to me through the rear window, and I raised my hand in response. When the car disappeared around the curve, I went back into the house. On the kitchen table, the manila envelope was still waiting. I picked it up, feeling its weight. Inside was something that neither John nor Mary knew. Something that would change everything once more, if I decided to use it. But I wouldn't. I went out to the backyard and lit a small fire. I opened the envelope, and one by one, I tossed the documents into the fire. The evidence that could have sent them to prison. The testimonies that would have completely destroyed their lives. The declarations that would have taken away their last hope. I watched the flames consume the paper as the black smoke rose into the clean evening sky. "Why are you doing that, boss?" asked Ethan, who had seen everything from the corral. Because true revenge, Ethan, is not destroying the other. It is reconstructing oneself so completely that the traitor's absence becomes irrelevant. But before they left, I left an envelope on the table. And inside it, the final blow that they never expected. But that blow never came, because I decided that living with the consequences of their actions would be punishment enough. 2 years after Claire's death, the Oak Ridge Ranch bloomed again. I got up before dawn, as I had done for 50 years. I made coffee on Claire's stove, using her favorite pot that had a twisted handle, but which I never dared to throw away. The aroma filled the empty kitchen, and for a moment, I could almost hear her voice. Ethan arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, as always. "Good morning, boss. The cattle in the north lot need checking." "Let's go," I replied, grabbing my hat. We walked together through the lands that were mine again. And not just on paper. In every repaired fence, in every clean furrow, in every healthy animal. Oak Ridge was breathing again, but differently. Quieter, more honest. Of the $2,340,000 I rescued, I invested $1,200,000 in modernizing the property. A new irrigation system, improvements to the corrals, a tractor that Ethan learned to drive as if he were born for it. The ranch prospered again, but without the excessive ambition that John dreamed of. Just honest land bearing honest fruit. The other $1,140,000 I kept in a special account. Mr. Leo Foster died 4 months after resolving my case. In his will, he left instructions that his fees were to be forgiven. "Robert," the letter his son handed me said, "your friendship is worth more than any dollar." I cried that afternoon for Leo, for the years that passed, for everything I gained and everything I lost. But life continued, and with it came Thomas. My grandson appeared one Saturday morning, 6 months after that painful visit. He arrived alone, walking along the dirt road with a backpack on his shoulder. He was 9 years old now, taller, thinner, but with the same clear eyes that Claire had. "Grandpa," he said when he reached the porch, "Mom doesn't know I'm here. I ran away from town. I walked 2 hours. "Why, son?" "Because I want to learn. I want you to teach me about the ranch, like you promised." I looked at him in silence. Behind him, in the distance, Mary was probably searching for him desperately. "Come in," I said. "I'll make you breakfast. Then we'll call your mother." I called Mary. She cried on the phone. She thanked me through sobs. But she didn't ask to come over. She knew that door was still closed. From that day on, Thomas came every Saturday. I taught him everything. How to check the cattle, how to repair fences, how to read the sky to predict rain, how to respect the land that feeds you, how to be a man of your word. "Grandpa," he asked me one day while we were planting alfalfa, "why doesn't Mom ever come onto the ranch?" He had noticed how she dropped him off at the beginning of the path. She waited in a borrowed car until I accompanied him back. But she never crossed the gate. Because there are doors, Thomas, that close with betrayal. And they only open with time, a lot of time. Even if you ask for forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't open doors, son. Forgiveness only eases the burden of the person who gives it. But trust, that must be rebuilt brick by brick. The boy nodded with a seriousness that did not correspond to his age. Mary tried to speak to me directly only once more. A year after recovering the ranch, she knocked on the door with trembling hands. When I opened it, I saw a different woman, thinner, with premature gray hair, with hands rough from now working cleaning houses to help with expenses. "Dad, she began. "Thomas is fine," I interrupted. "Yes, he's fine. Thanks to you, he's fine. Do you need anything? Money or food?" She shook her head. "I just needed to tell you that I understand. I understand why you did what you did. I understand that we deserve to lose everything. And I understand that maybe you can never completely forgive me." "Mary," I said, and my voice came out softer than I expected. "I already forgave you. The day I burned the papers that could have sent you to jail, I forgave you. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean that things go back to how they were." "I know, Dad. I just wanted you to know that I am still your daughter, even if I don't deserve to be. You will always be my daughter, Mary. That will never change. But the relationship we had, that died. The day you signed my name while I watched over your mother. She nodded, wiping her tears. Thank you for taking care of Thomas. He's a good boy. That was our last direct exchange. After that, our communication was limited to brief, courteous, functional messages, empty of the warmth we once had. John never returned to the ranch. According to Thomas, his father worked at the town hardware store. He had stopped drinking, and he was paying his debts off cent by cent. It would take him 10 years to settle them all. Dad says you taught him the most important lesson of his life, Thomas told me one Saturday. And what was that? That there are no shortcuts to dignity. That everything built with lies collapses with the truth. I smiled. At least he had learned something. One afternoon, I called Thomas into my office. He was 11 years old now, and he had demonstrated not only interest, but genuine respect for the land. Son, I want to show you something. I took out the documents for the bank account I had opened in his name. $1,140,000, growing with interest. This is yours, but you can only access this money when you turn 25 years old. And only if you have demonstrated that you learn to work the land with honesty. His eyes opened wide. Why, Grandpa? Why the money that is not earned is lost? Because the greatest inheritance I can leave you is not dollars, but principles. And because I want you to be the man your father could not be. The boy hugged my waist tightly. I promise, Grandpa, I promise. The ranch returned to being what Claire and I always wanted, a place of peace, without excessive ambitions, without impossible plans, just land, work, and the eternal cycle of sowing and harvesting. One night, exactly 2 years after Claire's death, I sat on the porch under the stars. Thomas was sleeping in the guest room, resting after learning how to shoe horses. The wind blew softly, bringing the smell of damp earth. I did it, my love, I whispered, looking up at the sky. I protected what is ours, and your great-grandson will follow in your footsteps. A shooting star crossed the firmament. The wind blew hard, moving the leaves of the trees we planted 40 years ago. And in that sound, I found peace. I didn't answer when they silenced me. I didn't recover what was mine with violence, without blind revenge, only with the patience of a 72-year-old man who knows that true justice is not rushed. The Oak Ridge Ranch will still be here when I am gone, and Thomas will inherit it, not because he is my grandson, but because he learned to love it as I loved it, to respect it as I respected it, to work it as Claire and I worked it for a lifetime. That is my final revenge. That what they tried to steal with lies remains in the family through the truth. And when Mary sees her son become the new owner of these lands, she will understand that the legacy of an honest man always triumphs over the ambitions of those who forget where they came from. I closed my eyes, listening to the crickets chirping and feeling the cool night breeze. For the first time in years, I slept in absolute peace. The ranch is flourishing again under my hands and Thomas's. Mary tries to get closer, but the gate never fully opens. Peace is not joy, it is rest. Teaching my grandson is my new legacy, and the price of dignity was high, but it was worth every dollar taken from their hands. I want to thank the Stories of Silence channel for giving me this space to tell my truth. If this story touched something inside you, subscribe, hit the bell, and leave me a comment. Would you forgive a child who betrayed you, or would you close the door forever? Thank you for listening to me.